Books and movies provide only virtual experiences, but those experiences are valuable nonetheless. Of course, travelling somewhere yourself and taking in the local atmosphere would be superior. Climbing a mountain yourself would unquestionably provide a higher quality experience than listening to someone else describe climbing one. But a person can only do so much, and so there is value in sharing in another's experiences vicariously through books and film. Stories allow you to experience places you could never go, the past, the future, or distant worlds. You can become a different ethnicity or gender. Even when you're reading all by yourself, you're sharing those stories as they unfold with countless people whom you've never met. We are alone, but we are connected. This excerpt, taken from Hideo Kojima's The Creative Gene, manages to perfectly describe the beauty of escapism, the necessity of stories both fantastical and informative, in inspiring and connecting us. Framed through the lens of the past 2 years, spent living in a global pandemic, and these comments have only become more pertinent. What better way to experience adventure while being confined to our homes than through art such as movies, books, and of course video games? At a time when I could barely leave my home, Death Stranding allowed me to do something that I love, safely and vicariously, that COVID had kept me from doing, and that's travelling, hiking, and exploring nature. It transported me to this beautiful and otherworldly landscape. The game mechanics made me feel every bump, every rock, and every tumble. The sound design allowed me to feel the wind, the grass, and the trees, all while connecting with other people. Firstly in-game by encountering other players' paths and structures, but also through sharing the game with my community on my Twitch channel. That feeling that Kojima described, of enjoying a story, watching it unfold while tacitly being connected to the people who are also experiencing it, was made tangible in Death Stranding. It's a solitary game, yet you are constantly connected to the other people who are on the same journey through the game's mechanics. We are alone, but connected. And now that the world has opened back up, I decided to reconnect with some old friends and take a trip to Iceland, to experience the country that inspired the world of Death Stranding, to put myself in Sam's shoes by traversing the Icelandic highlands, across lava fields, mountains and snowdrifts, through the cold, wind and rain, across rivers and ravines, to look upon firsthand the alien and beautifully barren landscape that was so masterfully recreated in the Decima engine by Kojima Productions. I went searching for that first-hand experience that Kojima describes, documenting it as I went, and in doing so I hope to take you along for the journey to try and relate and share my experiences in this real-life mirror of Death Stranding. This journey isn't just about walking in Sam's shoes, but also Kojima's. In August of 2014, Kojima was on vacation in Iceland, and while in Reykjavik he was recommended a music store. After picking out a few CDs in the store and taking them to the register, a song came over the radio. The band that happened to be playing was Low Roar. That store was likely 12 Toner, which also happens to be the independent record label which Low Roar was signed to. In The Creative Gene, Kojima talks about how he browses bookstores with a certain routine, a mantra almost, waiting for a certain book to call to him. This time, however, the art that called to Kojima was a piece of music. This chance encounter, this connection that he formed with Low Roar's music, would go on to shape much of the tone and atmosphere of Death Stranding, from the initial reveal trailer at E3 2016 to the final release, where much of Low Roar's back catalogue is used to punctuate key moments of reflection in the final game.
Rain, heavy clouds, dirty sweaty clothes, the routine that I've learned to understand and know.
Setting off, I put in my headphones and listened to Don't Be So Serious, the first track you hear from Low Roar in the game. The entire journey stretched out for days ahead of me. I was well rested and excited to take on the challenges to come, and I was listening to the song that always comes to mind first when I think of Death Stranding. Both the eerie and melancholic music from Low Roar, as well as the ethereal synths of Ludwig Forsal's original score, accompany the landscape of the game and the real-life Iceland perfectly. Iceland is truly like nowhere else on Earth. It is immediately recognisable, and it's that uniqueness that makes it feel like you're on another planet entirely. We set off and snaked our way gradually up between the Rhyolite Hills of Landmannalaugar in the Southern Highlands, with a daunting number of miles still ahead of us, occasionally turning back to look down at the start point. This part of the trail was well trodden and signposted, and while the climb into the hills was long, it wasn't especially difficult to navigate. Spirits were high, and the sun was attempting to peer through the clouds. The smell of sulphur was heavy in the air, and despite the bubbling of geysers and parts of the ground being warm to the touch, patches of snow and ice still clung to the hillsides. And where streams ran downwards, you could see small caves gouged out of the ice. Walking across the snowfields, I realised how grateful I was for the paths that had already been tracked into the snow. As with Death Stranding, the more frequently a path is walked, the deeper a trail is formed. This makes traversal and navigation a lot easier, especially when walking through snow. After a few hours, we encountered our first downpour. And while we didn't have BTs to worry about, I was concerned that if it persisted for too long, our gear might eventually become soaked right through. Setting up camp for the night in the rain wouldn't have been fun, especially with the majority of the trail still ahead of us. As well as the practical issues of constant rain, there is also the fact that it makes filming difficult, and it obscures a lot of the great views. We were at this point at the tallest peaks in the area, and would have been getting 360-degree views if not for the rain. Despite the layer of clouds, the area was still beautiful. Moss was attempting to grow in the lower valleys near the streams, and distant waterfalls dotted the landscape. And, as they say in Iceland, if you don't like the weather, just wait 5 minutes. And so the rain eventually let up, and we were approaching the end of the first leg of the journey. But first we needed to descend from the rusty hills of Landmannalaugar. As we pressed on, the hills gradually started to be flecked with more and more green, until eventually we were below the cloud line. And as the clouds slowly moved west to east below us, we were able to snatch glimpses of the day's endpoint. Far below, nestled between green and black hills, Alftvatn Lake. But before we could rest for the night, we first needed to tackle our first real obstacle, a river crossing. A task that would have been made a lot easier with an Odra deck. We had to search up and down the river for a point where it was shallow enough to wade through, but also slow moving enough that we wouldn't lose our footing. Eventually, we found our crossing and one by one made our way across. The moment my feet were submerged, I could barely feel them. The frigid meltwater seemed to penetrate deep into my bones. But after a long day of hiking with sore feet, it was actually quite soothing. As if the sky didn't want us to finish the day being too dry, it let out one last smattering of rain as we approached the lake. But with the lake in sight, and the stunning fields and hills painted with every shade of green surrounding us, it didn't dampen our spirits. With the first day now behind us, the sun started to hide behind the distant hills, but wouldn't stay there for long. After just a few hours of twilight, it would start to rise again. We set up camp by the lake, having completed the first part of our journey, and got some well-earned rest. Landmannalaugar most closely resembles the volcanic area to the southwest of the central region. Like me, I'm sure many of you first envision the rolling green hills when thinking of Death Stranding, but the addition of an orange, red, volcanically active area of the map, complete with steam plumes and sulphurous pools, goes a long way towards giving the players a visually diverse sandbox while being a true representation of Iceland. I spent most of the day not consciously comparing the scenery to Death Stranding, instead acclimating myself to the mountains and generally just taking in the views. It wasn't until the first day was nearly behind me, as I descended towards the lake, that I had not only a striking visual connection to Death Stranding, but also a tangible insight into those moments in the game where you can catch your breath after a particularly tense or difficult segment. The day had been long, and after hours of walking up and down the peaks with the fatigue starting to set in, I was reminded of that first delivery to Port Knot City, one of the earliest challenges in the game, where you haul your cargo up the mountain, through the BTs, and Timefall, and see Port Knot for the first time. I had also been rewarded with a stunning view of the lake and my destination. I couldn't resist popping in my headphones again and listening to Asylums for the Feelings as I made my way down.